The birthday balloons still hung from the mailbox when the first police cruiser arrived at 4247 Maple Grove Drive. Pink and purple latex shapes swayed in the October wind, their cheerful colors a stark contrast to the terror that had consumed the quiet suburban street in Millbrook Heights, Pennsylvania. It was October 17, 1998, and what should have been 8-year-old Emma Caldwell's most memorable birthday had become every parent's worst nightmare. Detective Frank Morrison stepped out of his unmarked sedan, his weathered face already grim with the weight of what he was about to encounter. At 52, Morrison had seen his share of missing children cases, but nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for the scene that awaited him inside the modest 2-story colonial home. The front door stood wide open, creaking on its hinges as if the house itself was crying out in anguish. Morrison's partner, Detective Lisa Vaughn, joined him on the front porch, her notepad already in hand. The silence was deafening. No children's laughter, no party music, no sounds of life at all. 7 kids, Vaughn whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. All between the ages of 7 and 9, all gone without a trace. Morrison nodded grimly. The call had come in at 3:47 p.m. from Patricia Caldwell, Emma's mother. Her voice on the 911 recording would later be described by emergency dispatchers as inhuman, the primal scream of terror that seemed to echo from the depths of hell itself. The party had started at 1:00 p.m. sharp. Patricia had spent weeks planning every detail. She'd ordered a custom princess cake from Morrison's Bakery on 5th Street. She'd hung streamers throughout the living room and dining room. She'd prepared goodie bags filled with candy and small toys. Everything had been perfect. The guest list was small but carefully curated. Emma's closest friends from Lincoln Elementary School. There was Tommy Fletcher, the class clown with the gap-toothed smile who could make anyone laugh. Mia Santos, the quiet girl with dark curls who loved to draw horses. Jake Morrison, no relation to the detective, a freckled boy who collected baseball cards with religious devotion. Ashley Park, the budding athlete who could outrun most of the boys in her class. Connor Walsh, the bookworm who always had his nose buried in a Hardy Boys mystery. And finally, Lily Chen, the new girl who had just moved to Millbrook Heights from California and was still finding her place among her new classmates. 7 children, 7 bright, innocent lives full of dreams and potential. 7 futures that would be forever altered in the span of what couldn't have been more than 30 minutes. Patricia Caldwell's story was both simple and impossibly complex. She had been in the kitchen putting the finishing touches on Emma's birthday cake when she heard the children's voices drift in from the backyard. They were playing some sort of game. She couldn't make out the specifics, but their laughter had been infectious. She remembered smiling to herself, thinking about how perfect the day was turning out to be. The cake decorating took longer than expected. Patricia was a perfectionist, and she wanted everything to be absolutely flawless for her daughter's special day. She spent nearly 20 minutes carefully placing each candy decoration, ensuring the pink frosting roses were positioned just right. When she finally emerged from the kitchen at approximately 2:15 p.m., carrying the completed masterpiece, she called out for the children to come inside for cake and ice cream. The silence that greeted her was immediate and absolute. "Kids," she had called again, her voice echoing through the empty house. "Come on, it's time for cake." Still nothing. Patricia set the cake down on the dining room table and walked through the house, checking each room systematically. The living room was empty, though the party decorations remained untouched. The children's coats were still hanging on the hooks by the front door. Their shoes were lined up neatly as it had been when the party started, except for one crucial detail. The children were gone. The backyard told no story at all. There were no signs of struggle, no disturbed ground, no abandoned toys or clothing. The swing set sat motionless in the afternoon breeze. The sandbox remained undisturbed. Even the birthday presents, which had been stacked carefully on the picnic table, were exactly where Patricia had left them. It was as if 7 children had simply vanished into thin air. Detective Morrison stood in that same backyard now, his experienced eyes scanning every inch of the property for clues that the initial responding officers might have missed. The Caldwell home sat on a corner lot, bordered by a tall wooden fence on two sides and neighboring properties on the others. The only access points were through the house itself or through a small gate that led to the side yard. That gate was locked from the inside. It had been locked when Patricia first checked it, and it remained locked when the police arrived. There were no footprints in the soft earth around the fence line, no broken boards, no evidence that anyone had climbed over or forced their way through. Vaughn approached Morrison with her preliminary findings. "I have interviewed the mother 3 times now," she said, her voice low and professional. "Her story hasn't changed, not a single detail. She was in the kitchen from approximately 1:55 to 2:15. When she came out, they were gone." "What about the neighbors?" Morrison asked, still staring at the swing set as if it might suddenly offer up its secrets. "That's where things get interesting," Vaughn replied, flipping through her notepad. "Margaret Henley next door says she was gardening in her front yard until about 2:30. She had a clear view of the Caldwell drive and front door. Nobody came or went, no vehicles, no strangers, nothing out of the ordinary." Morrison frowned. "What about the back neighbors?" The Kowalskis were both at work. Their house was empty. But here's the thing. Their dog was in the backyard the entire afternoon. Big German shepherd named Bruno. According to Mrs. Kowalski, that dog barks at everything. Squirrels, mailmen, leaves blowing in the wind. But their neighbor across the street, Mrs. Patterson, says she never heard Bruno bark once between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock. The implications hung heavy in the air between them. If 7 children had left the Caldwell backyard by any conventional means, as the afternoon wore on, the small army of police officers, FBI agents, and volunteers that had descended upon Millbrook Heights began to paint a picture that defied logic. The children's parents had been contacted, and each confirmed the same horrifying truth. Their child had not come home. Nobody had seen 7 children walking down the street. Nobody had witnessed any suspicious vehicles in the area. Nobody had heard screams or cries for help. It was as if Emma Caldwell, Tommy Fletcher, Mia Santos, Jake Morrison, Ashley Park, Connor Walsh, and Lily Chen had simply been erased from existence. The first 24 hours of any missing persons case are crucial, and law enforcement threw every available resource at finding the 7 missing children. Search dogs were brought in from 3 different counties. Helicopters scoured the surrounding woods and farmland. Dive teams checked every pond, creek, and storm drain within a 10-mile radius. The Pennsylvania State Police issued an immediate Amber Alert, though the lack of vehicle descriptions or suspect information made it largely ineffective. FBI Special Agent Rebecca Torres arrived from the Philadelphia field office at 11:30 p.m. on the night of the disappearance. A 15-year veteran with extensive experience in child abduction cases, Torres had hoped this would be a straightforward resolution. A miscommunication, children hiding in a neighbor's basement. Anything other than an actual abduction. But as she reviewed the initial reports and witness statements, a chill settled over her that had nothing to do with the October night air. "This doesn't fit any pattern I have ever seen," she confided to Detective Morrison as they stood in the Caldwell living room at nearly midnight. The birthday decorations now seemed macabre, like remnants from a funeral rather than a celebration. Child abductions involving multiple victims are extremely rare, and when they do occur, there are always witnesses, always evidence, some sort of trail to follow. Morrison nodded grimly. "We've got over 100 people searching right now. Dogs, helicopters, volunteers checking every building within 5 miles. Nothing. It's like they were never here, but they had been there." The evidence was undeniable. 7 sets of fingerprints on the sliding glass door leading to the backyard. 7 cups with varying amounts of fruit punch still sitting on the kitchen counter. 7 paper plates with half-eaten cake in the dining room trash can, where Patricia had dumped them in her panic before calling 911. The children had been in that house. They had been playing in that backyard. And then, in the span of 20 minutes, they had vanished without leaving behind so much as a footprint in the soft autumn soil. The media descended on Millbrook Heights like vultures within hours of the story breaking. By dawn on October 18th, news vans lined Maple Grove Drive, their satellite dishes reaching toward the gray sky like mechanical prayers for answers that wouldn't come. Reporter Angela Martinez from Channel 7 News was the first to coin the phrase that would haunt the case for decades to come: the birthday party vanishing. The story had everything that captivated public attention: innocent children, a suburban setting that could have been any American neighborhood, and a mystery so complete that it seemed to belong in the realm of science fiction rather than criminal investigation. Patricia Caldwell became the unwilling face of every parent's worst fear. Her haunted eyes stared out from television screens across the country as she made desperate pleas for her daughter's safe return. Her husband, David, a mild-mannered accountant who coached Little League on weekends, stood beside her at press conferences, his face a mask of barely controlled anguish. "Emma loves butterflies and ice cream and her little brother Max," Patricia said during one particularly heartbreaking press conference 3 days after the disappearance. "She's afraid of the dark and sleeps with a nightlight that projects stars on her ceiling. She's just a little girl who wants to come home to her family. Please, if anyone knows anything at all, please help us bring our babies home." But the tips that poured into the police department led nowhere. Claimed sightings from as far away as California and Florida proved false upon investigation. Well-meaning psychics offered their services, spinning elaborate tales of underground tunnels and secret societies that wasted precious investigative resources. Conspiracy theorists emerged from the woodwork with theories ranging from government cover-ups to alien abduction. The truth, as Agent Torres knew from experience, was likely far more mundane and infinitely more terrifying. Someone had taken 7 children from a suburban backyard in broad daylight, and they had done it with such precision and planning that they had left behind no evidence of their crime. The investigation expanded beyond Millbrook Heights as federal resources were brought to bear on the case. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit developed profiles of potential suspects, focusing on individuals with the capability to abduct and control multiple children simultaneously. This narrowed the suspect pool to a very specific type of offender, someone with extensive planning capabilities, likely with military or law enforcement training, and access to a large vehicle or multiple vehicles. But even with these parameters, the investigation yielded frustratingly little progress. Background checks on every adult who had access to information about Emma's birthday party came back clean. Surveillance footage from traffic cameras and nearby businesses showed no suspicious vehicles in the area during the crucial time window. Financial records revealed no unusual transactions that might indicate preparation for a large-scale abduction. As October turned to November, and November faded into December, the harsh reality began to set in. The 7 children of Millbrook Heights might never be found. The holidays were particularly brutal for the families involved. 7 empty chairs at Christmas dinner tables, 7 sets of unopened presents under Christmas trees, 7 stockings hanging unfilled by fireplaces, their cheerful red fabric a mockery of the joy they were meant to represent. The community tried to maintain hope through organized vigils and prayer services, but the weight of unanswered questions grew heavier with each passing day. Support groups formed for the families, led by grief counselors and child psychologists, who struggled to address a trauma so complete and inexplicable that it challenged their professional training. Patricia Caldwell aged years in a matter of months. Her once bright smile became a distant memory, replaced by the hollow expression of a mother whose child had been stolen from her in the most incomprehensible way possible. She quit her job as a nurse at Millbrook General Hospital, unable to focus on helping others heal when her own wounds felt fatal. David Caldwell threw himself into the investigation with obsessive determination. He learned about forensic science and criminal psychology, transforming their living room into a makeshift command center filled with maps, timelines, and photographs. The other families coped in their own ways. Tommy Fletcher's parents, both teachers at the local high school, started a scholarship fund in their son's name. Mia Santos's mother, a single parent who had immigrated from Mexico 5 years earlier, praying to every single day, praying to every saint she could name. Jake Morrison's family, to avoid confusion with Detective Morrison, the media referred to them as the other Morrisons, organized search parties that continued long after the official searches had been called off. Ashley Park's parents channeled their grief into advocacy, pushing for legislative changes that would improve response protocols for child abduction cases. Connor Walsh's mother and father, both professors at Penn State, used their academic connections to bring attention to the case in psychological and criminological journals. Lily Chen's parents, devastated by the loss of their daughter so soon after moving to what they thought would be a safe community, struggled with guilt and cultural isolation that made their grief even more profound. By the spring of 1999, the active investigation had been scaled back significantly. The FBI maintained the case in an open status, but the day-to-day search efforts had ceased. Detective Morrison, now promoted to lead investigator on the case, continued to follow up on tips and leads, but the flow of new information had slowed to a trickle. The first anniversary of the disappearance brought renewed media attention, but it also marked a grim milestone that nobody wanted to acknowledge. Statistically, the chances of finding the children alive had become virtually non-existent. Agent Torres, now reassigned to other cases but still haunted by the Millbrook Heights mystery, made a promise to herself that she would never stop looking for answers. She kept copies of all the case files in her home office, reviewing them periodically for details that might have been overlooked or connections that might have been missed. The case had violated every principle of criminal investigation that she had learned over her career. Child abductors made mistakes. They left evidence. They had patterns of behavior that could be analyzed and predicted. They couldn't simply make 7 children disappear without a trace, without witnesses, without leaving behind even the smallest clue about their identity or whereabouts. Yet that was exactly what had happened on October 17, 1998, in a quiet suburban neighborhood where the worst crime in recent memory had been teenagers spray-painting graffiti on the water tower. As the years passed, the case became something of a legend in law enforcement circles. Rookie FBI agents studied it as an example of how even the most thorough investigations could hit seemingly insurmountable walls. Criminal psychology professors used it as a case study in their graduate courses, challenging students to develop theories about how such a crime could be accomplished. The families of the 7 missing children tried to rebuild their lives, though the empty spaces left by their children's absence could never be filled. Some moved away from Millbrook Heights, unable to bear the constant reminders of their loss. Others stayed, determined to be present in case their children somehow found their way home. The house at 4247 Maple Grove Drive remained empty for 3 years after the disappearance. Patricia and David Caldwell couldn't bear to live there anymore, but they also couldn't bring themselves to sell it. It stood as a monument to their loss, its windows dark and its yard slowly becoming overgrown. When they finally did sell in 2001, the new owners were unaware of the property's history. The realtor, bound by disclosure laws, had mentioned that there had been a police incident at the house, but the young couple who bought it assumed it was something minor, a burglary perhaps, or vandalism. They learned the truth from their neighbors on their first night in the house, when Mrs. Henley brought over a casserole and hesitantly asked if they knew about what happened with those poor children. The new owners, Janet and Michael Torres, no relation to Agent Torres, were horrified but decided to stay. They had 3 young children of their own, and despite the tragedy associated with the house, they felt that filling it with laughter and life again might be a form of healing for the entire neighborhood. But strange things began happening almost immediately. Their 5-year-old daughter, Sophie, claimed that she could hear children playing in the backyard late at night. Their 7-year-old son, Marcus, insisted that he had seen a little girl in a pink birthday dress standing by his bedroom window. Their infant daughter, barely 6 months old, would cry inconsolably whenever she was placed in the room that had once been Emma Caldwell's bedroom. Janet Torres, a practical woman who didn't believe in ghosts or supernatural phenomena, tried to dismiss these incidents as the product of overactive imaginations and the power of suggestion. But as the months passed, She found herself growing increasingly uneasy in the house that was supposed to be their dream home. The breaking point came on October 17, 2002, exactly 4 years after the disappearance. Janet was putting Sophie to bed when her daughter suddenly sat up in bed, her eyes wide with excitement. "Mommy," Sophie whispered, "the birthday girl is here. She wants to know if I can come to her party." Janet felt her blood turn to ice. She had never told Sophie about Emma Caldwell or the birthday party. The children had been strictly instructed never to discuss the house's history, hoping to protect them from unnecessary fear. "What birthday girl, sweetheart?" Janet asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "The one in the pink dress," Sophie replied matter-of-factly. "She's standing right there by the window. She says all her friends are waiting in the backyard, but they can't have cake until more children come to the party." Janet looked toward the window where her daughter was pointing. She saw nothing but the reflection of the bedroom lamp in the dark glass. But as she stared, she could have sworn she heard something that made her heart skip a beat. The faint sound of children's laughter drifting up from the backyard below. The Torres family moved out of 4247 Maple Grove Drive 3 weeks later, forfeiting their security deposit and taking a significant financial loss in the process. They never spoke publicly about their experiences in the house, but Janet confided in a close friend that she was convinced the 7 missing children were still somehow present in that place, trapped in a perpetual birthday party that could never end. The house remained empty again for nearly a decade after that, earning a reputation as the most haunted property in Millbrook Heights. Teenagers dared each other to approach it on Halloween nights. Local ghost hunting groups requested permission to investigate it. Urban legends grew around it, each more elaborate and terrifying than the last. But Detective Morrison, now nearing retirement, remained focused on facts rather than folklore. He had never given up hope that someday, somehow, he would find the answers that had eluded him for so many years. He kept the case files in his desk drawer, adding new information whenever it became available, no matter how insignificant it might seem. In 2010, 12 years after the disappearance, Morrison received a phone call that reignited his hope for solving the case. A construction crew working on a housing development 15 miles from Millbrook Heights had uncovered what appeared to be a child's shoe buried 3 feet underground. The shoe was pink with Velcro straps consistent with the type that 8-year-old Emma Caldwell had been wearing on the day of her birthday party. The discovery led to the most extensive search effort since the original investigation. Ground-penetrating radar was used to scan the entire construction site. Forensic anthropologists were brought in to examine the soil samples. The FBI's evidence response team spent weeks carefully excavating the area around where the shoe had been found. But despite the massive effort, no other evidence was recovered. DNA testing on the shoe proved inconclusive. Too much time had passed, and too much contamination had occurred for any useful genetic material to be extracted. The dead end was particularly crushing for the families, who had allowed themselves to hope that they might finally learn the fate of their children. The cruel possibility that the shoe might have belonged to an entirely different child, lost in an unrelated incident years earlier, added another layer of torment to their already unbearable grief. As Morrison prepared for his retirement in 2015, he made one final attempt to solve the case that had defined his cold case unit, and requested that the birthday party vanishing be designated as a high-priority cold case, eligible for the most advanced forensic techniques and investigative resources available. Agent Sarah Chen, a specialist in cold case investigations, was assigned to lead the renewed effort. Chen brought fresh eyes to the case files, reviewing every piece of evidence, with the benefit of nearly 2 decades of technological advancement and investigative experience that hadn't existed in 1998. One detail in particular caught her attention: a passing reference in Detective Morrison's notes to a delivery truck that had been parked on Elm Street, 2 blocks from the Caldwell house, on the morning of October 17th. The truck had been gone by the time police arrived to investigate, and in the chaos of the initial response, no one had thought to track down its owner or purpose. Chen spent months running down this single lead, working through delivery companies, maintenance contractors, and utility services that might have had vehicles in the area that day. The work was painstakingly slow and often seemed futile, but Chen had learned that cold cases were often solved by the most seemingly insignificant details. In March 2019, she finally found what she was looking for. The truck had belonged to a landscaping company called Green Valley Services, owned and operated by a man named Walter Krieg. The company had been hired to install an irrigation system at a property on Elm Street, just 2 blocks from where 7 children had vanished 21 years earlier. When Chen ran a background check on Walter Krieg, she discovered something that made her pulse quicken. Krieg had been arrested in 2003 for attempting to lure a child into his van in Lancaster County. He had served 18 months in prison and was required to register as a sex offender. But when Chen tried to locate Krieg for questioning, she discovered that he had died in 2017 of lung cancer, taking whatever secrets he might have possessed to his grave. It was another devastating dead end, but it had given Chen something that the case had lacked for over 2 decades: a viable suspect with means, opportunity, and a history of predatory behavior toward children. Working with forensic genealogists and advanced DNA analysis techniques that hadn't existed in 1998, Chen began the process of trying to connect Walter Krieg to the Millbrook Heights disappearance. If Krieg had been responsible for taking the 7 children, there might be physical evidence at his former residence or business location that could provide the answers that had eluded investigators for so long. The investigation led Chen to a property in rural Lancaster County, where Krieg had lived and operated his landscaping business. The property had been sold after his death, but Chen obtained permission from the current owners to conduct a forensic examination of the ground. What she found there would change everything. On November 15, 2021, nearly 23 years after 7 children vanished from a birthday party in Millbrook Heights, Pennsylvania, FBI forensic teams made a discovery that would finally begin to answer the questions that had haunted a community and 7 families for more than 2 decades. But the answers they found were more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. The ground-penetrating radar unit hummed to life in the pre-dawn darkness of November 15, 2021. Agent Sarah Chen watched as the technicians slowly guided the device across the overgrown field behind what had once been Walter Krieg's landscaping business. The property, nestled in the rolling hills of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, had been abandoned for nearly 4 years, since Krieg's death from lung cancer. Chen had been pursuing this lead for 8 months, ever since discovering that Krieg's delivery truck had been in the vicinity of Millbrook Heights on October 17, 1998. The convicted sex offender's connection to the birthday party vanishing was circumstantial at best, but it was the first real lead the case had seen in over 2 decades. The current property owner, a farmer named Robert Hutchinson, had purchased the land at auction in 2018, planning to expand his corn operation. He had been cooperative but skeptical when Chen approached him about conducting a forensic examination of the grounds. Nothing but weeds and old equipment back there, Hutchinson had told her. Krieg kept to himself mostly, never saw much activity except for his landscaping trucks coming and going. But the ground-penetrating radar was telling a different story. At 6:47 IDM, the technician stopped the device and called Chen over to examine the display screen. What she saw made her heart race with a mixture of hope and dread she had learned to recognize over her years working cold cases. "You seeing what I'm seeing?" the technician asked quietly. Chen nodded, staring at the unmistakable outline displayed on the radar screen. Approximately 8 feet below the surface, the device had detected a large rectangular anomaly consistent with a buried structure or container. The dimensions were roughly 12 feet by 8 feet, large enough to be significant, but not so large as to be a natural formation. "We need to call in the full forensic team," Chen said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "And we need to do it now." Within hours, the quiet rural property had been transformed into a controlled archaeological excavation site. FBI forensic specialists, cadaver dogs, and crime scene photographers worked methodically, under the supervision of Dr. Elizabeth Foster, one of the nation's leading forensic anthropologists. The excavation began at noon, with team members using hand tools to carefully remove layers of soil and debris. The work was painstakingly slow. Any evidence that might have survived underground for over 20 years could be destroyed by a single careless shovel stroke. At 3:15 p.m., Dr. Foster's trowel struck something solid. "I have got something here," she announced, her voice carrying across the excavation site. "It's artificial, looks like metal." As more soil was carefully removed, the outline of a large metal container became visible. It appeared to be some sort of industrial storage unit or shipping container, buried at an angle that suggested it had been placed there deliberately and with considerable planning. Chen felt her phone buzzing with calls from FBI headquarters, local law enforcement, and media outlets that had somehow gotten wind of the excavation. She ignored them all, focusing entirely on the container that was slowly being revealed in the Pennsylvania soil. By 5:30 p.m., enough of the container had been uncovered to reveal its full dimensions and construction. It was a modified shipping container, approximately 20 feet long and 8 feet wide, with what appeared to be ventilation systems and electrical conduits running along its exterior walls. Dr. Foster examined the container's surface with a magnifying glass, looking for any markings or identifying features that might provide clues about its origin or purpose. What she found made her blood run cold. "Sarah," she called out quietly, "you need to see this." Chen approached the container and knelt beside Dr. Foster, who was pointing to a series of small scratches in the metal near what appeared to be a sealed door. "These aren't random scratches," Dr. Foster explained. "They are deliberate markings. Look at this one. It's clearly the letter E, and this one looks like M." Chen's breath caught in her throat as she realized what she was looking at. The scratches formed letters and partial words, carved into the metal by fingernails or small implements. Among the markings, she could make out fragments that sent chills down her spine. "E.M. Emma," Chen whispered. "Emma Caldwell." The implications hit her like a physical blow. If these markings had been made by the missing children, it meant they had been alive inside this container for at least some period of time after their abduction. The thought of 7 terrified children trapped in this underground prison was almost too horrible to comprehend. As darkness fell over the excavation site, portable floodlights were brought in to allow the work to continue. Chen had made the difficult decision to notify the families of the 7 missing children about the discovery, but she had asked them to remain at home until more was known about what the container contained. The conversations with the families had been among the most difficult of her career. Patricia Caldwell had broken down completely upon learning that her daughter might have been alive and suffering in an unknown period of time. David Caldwell had demanded to be allowed at the excavation site, requiring Chen to gently but firmly explain that the integrity of the investigation had to be maintained. At 9:45 p.m., Dr. Foster declared that enough of the container had been uncovered to attempt opening it. The sealed door appeared to have multiple locking mechanisms, including both electronic and mechanical systems that had long since ceased to function. A specialized FBI team using cutting tools began the delicate process of opening the container. Chen watched from a safe distance, her heart pounding with anticipation and terror about what they might find inside. The first cut took nearly an hour to complete, with team members taking extreme care not to damage any potential evidence inside the container. When the cutting was finished, Dr. Foster approached the opening with a high-powered flashlight and protective equipment. "I'm going to make an initial visual examination," she announced to the assembled team. "Nobody else approaches until I have completed my assessment." Chen watched Dr. Foster's face as she peered into the container, looking for any sign of what had been discovered. The forensic anthropologist's expression was unreadable in the harsh glare of the floodlights, but Chen could see tension in her posture that suggested something significant had been found. After what felt like an eternity, Dr. Foster stepped back from the container and removed her protective mask. Her face was pale, but her expression was one of confusion rather than the grief or horror Chen had expected. Terror, Dr. Foster said slowly. You need to see this. But it's not what any of us expected. Chen approached the container opening with a mixture of dread and anticipation. She had prepared herself mentally for the worst possible scenario, the remains of 7 children who had died in captivity over 20 years ago. What she saw instead challenged every assumption she had made about the case. The container was empty. Not just empty of bodies, but empty of everything except for a few scattered items that appeared to have been left behind intentionally. There was no evidence that anyone had ever been held captive inside the space. No restraints, no makeshift beds, no personal belongings that might have belonged to the missing children. Instead, the container appeared to have been used as some sort of storage or staging area. There were maps spread across a makeshift table, photographs pinned to the metal walls, and what appeared to be detailed floor plans of houses and buildings throughout central Pennsylvania. Chen entered the container carefully, using her flashlight to examine the materials that had been left behind. The maps showed detailed routes through rural Pennsylvania, with numerous locations marked in red ink. The photographs appeared to be surveillance images of children playing in various locations, playgrounds, schoolyards, suburban neighborhoods. But it was the floor plans that made Chen's blood run cold. She recognized several of the layouts immediately, including detailed architectural drawings of 4247 Maple Grove Drive, the Caldwell family home where the birthday party had taken place. This wasn't just about Emma's birthday party, Chen realized aloud. This was much bigger than we thought. Dr. Foster joined Chen inside the container, and together they began cataloging the evidence that Walter Krieg had left behind. What emerged was a picture of a predator who had been planning and executing child abductions across Pennsylvania for years, possibly decades. The maps showed over 30 locations throughout the state, each marked with dates and cryptic notations. Cross-referencing these locations with missing children reports from the Pennsylvania State Police database revealed a chilling pattern. Nearly every marked location corresponded to an unsolved child disappearance dating back to the early 1990s. The photographs were even more disturbing. They showed dozens of children at various locations, clearly taken without their knowledge or consent. Many of the images appeared to have been captured over extended periods, suggesting that Krieg had been stalking his potential victims for weeks or months before taking action. Among the photographs, Chen found images that made her hands shake, clear pictures of Emma Caldwell, Tommy Fletcher, Mia Santos, Jake Morrison, Ashley Park, Connor Walsh, and Lily Chen, playing in the Caldwell backyard on what appeared to be the day of Emma's birthday party. The timestamp on the photograph showed they had been taken at 1:47 p.m. on October 17, 1998, less than 30 minutes before the children vanished. He was watching them, Chen whispered. He was right there, photographing them, and nobody saw him. But the most disturbing discovery was yet to come. Hidden beneath a loose metal panel at the far end of the container, Dr. Foster found a collection of journals written in Walter Krieg's handwriting. The journals detailed his methods for abducting children, his techniques for avoiding detection, and most horrifyingly, his detailed plans for what he described as relocations. According to Krieg's own words, he had not been acting alone. The journals referenced a network of individuals involved in what appeared to be a sophisticated child trafficking operation spanning multiple states. The children abducted from various locations throughout Pennsylvania had not been killed. They had been transported to locations outside the state for purposes that Krieg's writings only hinted at in the most disturbing terms. The journal entry dated October 18, 1998, one day after the birthday party disappeared. 7 packages successfully relocated to facility designation Alpha 7. Transport completed without complications. Local law enforcement response predictable and ineffective. Network partners confirm all packages arrived intact and processing will begin immediately. Recommend expanding operation to additional suburban targets in coming months. Chen felt sick reading Krieg's cold, clinical description of the 7 missing children as packages to be processed. But the entry also provided the first real hope the case had seen in over 2 decades. If Krieg was telling the truth in his journal, the children might have survived their abduction. The reference to facility designation Alpha 7 sent Chen's investigative team scrambling through the additional materials found in the container. Among Krieg's maps and documents, they found references to dozens of facilities throughout the eastern United States, each designated with alphanumeric codes. Working through the night, FBI analysts began the process of identifying the locations referenced in Krieg's documentation. The work was complicated by the fact that many of the addresses appeared to be coded or abbreviated, requiring extensive cross-referencing with property records and satellite imagery. At 4:30 a.m. on November 16th, analyst Jennifer Walsh, no relation to missing child Connor Walsh, made a breakthrough that would redirect the entire investigation. "I think I found Alpha 7, she announced to the exhausted investigative team. "It's a property in upstate New York near the Canadian border, purchased in 1997 by a shell corporation with ties to several other properties mentioned in Krieg's journals. The property was a former summer camp that had been closed since the early 1990s. Satellite imagery showed numerous buildings scattered across over 200 acres of heavily wooded land, with access limited to a single private road that connected to a remote state highway. Chen made the decision to coordinate with FBI field officers in New York to conduct an immediate reconnaissance of the facility. If there was even a remote chance that any of the missing children from Pennsylvania had been taken to this location, every hour of delay could be critical. But as dawn broke over the Lancaster County excavation site, Chen received a phone call that changed the entire trajectory of the investigation. "Agent Chen," the voice on the other end of the line said, "This is Deputy Director Harrison from FBI headquarters. We need to discuss the materials you discovered yesterday. There are national security implications that we weren't aware of." The phrase "national security implications" sent a chill down Chen's spine. In her experience, it usually meant that the case was about to be taken out of her hands and classified at levels that would prevent the families from ever learning the truth about their missing children. "What kind of national security implications?" Chen asked carefully. "The shell corporation that owns the New York property you identified," Harrison replied. "It has connections to a federal investigation that's been ongoing for over 15 years. We are going to need to coordinate this operation at the highest levels." Chen hung up the phone with a growing sense of dread. She had seen too many cases disappear into the black hole of national security classifications, never to be resolved or explained to the families who deserved answers. But she had also spent over 2 years of her life trying to solve the birthday party vanishing, and she wasn't about to let bureaucratic concerns prevent her from finding out what had happened to 7 innocent children. Making a decision that would probably end her career, Chen called Detective Frank Morrison, now retired but still living in Millbrook Heights. "Frank," she said when he answered, "I need you to do something for me. And I need you to do it quickly before the federal bureaucracy shuts us down." Morrison, now in his 70s but still sharp as ever, listened as Chen explained what they had discovered in Krieg's underground container and the potential location of the missing children in upstate New York. "I can't officially authorize what I'm about to ask you to do," Chen continued, "but I can tell you that facility's address. And I can tell you that local law enforcement in New York might be interested in conducting a welfare check on that property." Morrison understood immediately. "You want me to make some unofficial phone calls to some old contacts who might be willing to take a drive up there and see what they can see?" "I never said that," Chen replied. "But if someone were to accidentally discover evidence of criminal activity during a routine patrol or welfare check, that would be information that couldn't be classified or buried." 2 hours later, Morrison was on the phone with Sheriff Tom Bradley of Adirondack County, New York, a former Pennsylvania state police officer who had worked several joint investigations with Morrison in the 1990s. Tom Morrison said, "I've got an address up in your neck of the woods that might be worth checking out. Property's been abandoned for years. but there's been some suspicious activity reported by local residents. Bradley agreed to conduct a routine patrol of the property that afternoon, unaware that he was about to uncover evidence that would finally provide answers to one of Pennsylvania's most notorious cold cases. At 3:20 p.m. on November 16th, Sheriff Bradley and Deputy Maria Santos, a coincidental name match with missing child Mia Santos, arrived at the former summer camp property in upstate New York. The facility consisted of numerous buildings in various states of decay, connected by overgrown paths through dense forest. Bradley's initial impression was that the property had been abandoned for years. Windows were broken, roofs were caving in, and vegetation had begun to reclaim much of the developed area. But as they explored the grounds more thoroughly, both officers began to notice details that suggested recent activity. Fresh tire tracks in the mud near what appeared to be a main lodge building, recently cut vegetation along the access road, and most significantly, the smell of wood smoke coming from somewhere deeper in the complex. Following the scent of smoke, Bradley and Santos made their way to a cluster of buildings near the center of the property. What they found there would haunt them for the rest of their careers. In a building that appeared to have been a dining hall during the property's days as a summer camp, they discovered evidence of recent habitation. There were mattresses on the floor, personal belongings scattered throughout the space, and what appeared to be makeshift classrooms with desks and educational materials. But it was the photographs covering one wall of the building that made both officers reach for their radios to call for backup. The wall contained hundreds of photographs of children, ranging in age from approximately 6 to 16 years old. The images appeared to have been taken over a period of many years, with some showing signs of significant age, and others appearing much more recent. Among the photographs, Deputy Santos made a discovery that stopped her heart. A school picture of a young girl with dark curls and a bright smile, labeled Mia Santos Lincoln Elementary, Millbrook Heights, PA, 1998. Tom Santos called out shakily, "You need to see this right now." Sheriff Bradley joined his deputy at the wall of photographs, and together they identified 6 additional images that matched the descriptions of the children who had vanished from Emma Caldwell's birthday party over 23 years earlier. But the photographs were not the most disturbing discovery in the building. In what appeared to be an office area, Bradley found filing cabinets containing detailed records of dozens of children, including medical information, psychological profiles, and documentation of what could only be described as training programs. The records painted a picture of an operation far more sophisticated and horrifying than either officer could have imagined. Children appeared to be categorized by age, physical characteristics, and aptitudes, then subjected to intensive educational and psychological conditioning programs designed to prepare them for what the documents referred to as permanent placement services. Among the files, Bradley found records for all 7 children who had disappeared from Millbrook Heights in 1998. According to the documentation, they had been transported to the facility within hours of their abduction, and had remained there for varying periods of time before being moved to what the records described as long-term assignments. The most recent entries in the files were dated 2019, suggesting that the operation had continued for over 2 decades after the birthday party disappearance. But the files also contained information that provided the first real hope for resolution of the case. Several of the children, including Emma Caldwell, had records indicating they had been transferred to domestic placement services, rather than international assignments. The files included current names and locations for children who had been given new identities and placed with families throughout the United States. If the records were accurate, some of the children who had vanished from Millbrook Heights in 1998 might still be alive, living under assumed names with no memory of their original identities or families. Sheriff Bradley immediately contacted the FBI, and within hours, the abandoned summer camp had become the center of the largest child trafficking investigation in FBI history. Agent Chen arrived at the scene the following morning, accompanied by teams of forensic specialists, child psychologists, and victim advocates. The scope of what they discovered over the following weeks defied comprehension. The facility had been used as a processing center for a child trafficking network that had operated across multiple states for over 3 decades. Records found at the site documented the abduction and trafficking of over 400 children, with connections to similar facilities throughout North America. Walter Krieg, it turned out, had been a relatively minor player in a criminal organization with connections to organized crime, corrupt officials and wealthy clients who paid enormous sums for children to be delivered for various purposes, ranging from illegal adoption to far more sinister activities. But for Agent Chen and the families of the 7 missing children from Millbrook Heights, the most important discovery was a set of records that provided detailed information about what had happened to Emma, Tommy, Mia, Jake, Ashley, Connor, and Lily after their abduction in 1998. According to the files, all 7 children had survived their initial captivity and had been placed with families throughout the United States under new identities. The records included photographs taken as recently as 2018, showing the children as adults living normal lives with no apparent memory of their original identities or the trauma they had experienced. The psychological conditioning programs documented in the facility's records had been designed to completely erase the children's memories of their lives before their abduction, replacing those memories with false histories that made them believe they had always lived with their assigned families. On December 15, 2021, Agent Chen stood in the conference room of the FBI field office in Philadelphia, looking at 7 case files spread across the table. Each file contained the current identity and location of one of the children who had vanished from Emma Caldwell's birthday party over 23 years earlier. The decision about how to proceed was one of the most difficult of her career. The individuals who had once been Emma, Tommy, Mia, Jake, Ashley, Connor, and Lily were now adults with their own lives, careers, and families. They had been psychologically conditioned to believe false histories about their childhoods, and attempting to restore their original memories could cause severe psychological trauma. But their original families deserved to know that their children were alive, and the adults deserved to know the truth about their identities regardless of the psychological cost. The first contact was made on January 8, 2022, when FBI agents approached a 31-year-old woman named Rebecca Johnson, who worked as a nurse in Portland, Oregon. According to the trafficking records, Rebecca Johnson had been Emma Caldwell, and she bore a strong physical resemblance to the missing 8-year-old despite over 2 decades of aging. The conversation was conducted with extreme care, in the presence of specialized psychologists trained in recovered memory therapy. Rebecca initially denied any connection to the name Emma Caldwell or the town of Millbrook Heights, Pennsylvania. But when shown photographs from the birthday party and DNA evidence linking her to Patricia and David Caldwell, Rebecca's carefully constructed false memories began to crack. Over the course of several sessions, fragments of her original identity began to surface, including emotional memories of a pink birthday dress and the taste of vanilla cake. The reunion between Rebecca Johnson and her original parents was arranged for February 14, 2022. Valentine's Day seemed appropriate for a celebration of love that had survived over 2 decades of separation. Patricia Caldwell, now 62 years old and gray-haired, looked into the eyes of the daughter she had lost when she was 8 years old. Rebecca, confused and emotionally overwhelmed by recovered memories that felt both foreign and familiar, slowly began to recognize the woman who had given birth to her. "Mum," Rebecca whispered, the word feeling strange in her mouth after so many years of calling another woman by that name. Patricia broke down completely, holding her daughter for the first time in over 23 years. The moment was captured by FBI photographers as evidence for the ongoing prosecution of the trafficking network, but it was also a moment of pure joy that had seemed permanent. Similar reunions were arranged for the other 6 children over the following months. Not all of them went as smoothly as Rebecca's reunion with her parents. Some of the recovered adults struggled with the revelation that their entire childhood memories were false, leading to identity crises that required extensive therapy. Tommy Fletcher, now living under the name Michael Davis and working as a high school teacher in Colorado, initially refused to believe that he was not who he thought he was. It took months of therapy and DNA evidence to convince him to meet with his original parents. Ashley Park had become Dr. Amanda Stevens, a successful pediatrician in Florida, with a husband and 2 young children of her own. Learning that her childhood memories were fabricated sent her into a severe depression that required hospitalization. But despite the trauma associated with recovering their true identities, all 7 of the formerly missing children eventually chose to reconnect with their original families in some capacity. The process was lengthy and complex, involving legal proceedings to restore their original names and identities while preserving their coming lives and relationships. The criminal investigation into the trafficking network led to arrests across multiple states and countries. Over 200 individuals were indicted on charges ranging from kidnapping and child trafficking to money laundering and racketeering. The network had generated hundreds of millions of dollars over 3 decades of operation. Walter Krieg, despite being deceased, was identified as having been responsible for the abduction of at least 47 children throughout Pennsylvania and neighboring states. His death had prevented his prosecution, but the evidence found in his underground container and at the New York facility provided closure for dozens of families who had never known what happened to their missing children. The house at 4247 Maple Grove Drive was finally able to shed its reputation as a haunted property. Janet and Michael Torres, the family who had experienced strange phenomena while living there, were contacted by paranormal investigators who theorized that the ghosts they had encountered were actually psychic imprints left by the trauma of the abduction. Whether or not one believed in such explanations, the house was purchased by a new family in late 2022, and no further supernatural incidents were reported. The new owners, aware of the property's history, held a blessing ceremony and planted a memorial garden in the backyard where 7 children had played on what was supposed to be the happiest day of Emma Torwell's young life. On October 17, 2023, exactly 25 years after the birthday party disappearance, the 7 survivors and their families gathered at Millbrook Heights Community Park for a memorial service honoring the childhood innocence that had been stolen from them, and celebrating the remarkable resilience that had allowed them to reclaim their lives. Rebecca Johnson, now legally Emma Caldwell, once again stood at the podium wearing a pink dress in honor of the 8-year-old girl she had once been. Her recovered memories were still fragmented and incomplete, but she had regained enough of her original identity to feel connected to both her past and her present. "We were 7 children who went to a birthday party and never came home," she said to the assembled crowd of family members, investigators, and community supporters. "But we survived, and we are here today to tell you that love is stronger than evil, and truth is stronger than the lies that were used to steal our childhoods." Detective Frank Morrison, now 77 years old and using a walker, stood in the back of the crowd with tears streaming down his weathered face. After 25 years of searching for answers, he had finally been able to bring the 7 missing children home. Agent Sarah Chen watched from the side of the gathering, knowing that the birthday party vanishing case would define her career just as it had defined Morrison's. But unlike Morrison, she had been able to see the case through to its resolution, providing closure not just for 7 families, but for an entire community that had been haunted by unanswered questions for over 2 decades. The investigation into the child trafficking network continued, with new arrests and discoveries being made regularly. The facility in upstate New York had led to the identification of similar operations throughout North America, and international law enforcement agencies were working to dismantle what appeared to be a global network of child traffickers. But for the families of Emma, Tommy, Mia, Jake, Ashley, Connor, and Lily, the most important victory had already been achieved. Their children had come home, even if they were now adults with lives and identities that bore little resemblance to the 8- and 9-year-olds who had vanished from a suburban backyard on a crisp October afternoon in 1998. The 7 survivors began meeting regularly for therapy sessions and social gatherings, helping each other navigate the complex process of integrating their recovered memories with their current lives. They formed bonds that were both new and ancient, based on shared trauma, but strengthened by their collective survival and recovery. As the criminal trials related to the trafficking network proceeded through the courts, More details emerged about the scope and sophistication of the operation that had victimized hundreds of children over multiple decades. The revelations were horrifying, but they also led to significant changes in how law enforcement agencies approach missing children cases and coordinate across jurisdictional boundaries. The birthday party vanishing, which had once seemed like an impossible mystery that defied every principle of criminal investigation, ultimately became a textbook case in the importance of never giving up on cold cases and the power of advanced forensic techniques to solve crimes that had seemed unsolvable. But perhaps most importantly, it became a story of hope. That even in the darkest circumstances, love endures, truth prevails, and sometimes, against all odds, the missing do come home. The 7 children who had vanished from Emma Caldwell's 8th birthday party were no longer children, and they would carry the scars of their ordeal for the rest of their lives. But they were alive, they were free, and they were finally, after 25 years of separation, home where they belonged. In a world often defined by tragedy and loss, the resolution of the birthday party vanishing stood as a reminder that some stories, no matter how dark they begin, can still have endings that restore faith in the possibility of justice and the enduring power of love to overcome even the most unimaginable evil.